Vote yes on the Second Amendment. Open the people's government. I yield the floor.
Thank you. I come to the floor today as the chairman of the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee, and I rise to express my strong support for the End the Government Shutdown and Secure Our Borders Act. This legislation includes many important priorities, and they're important priorities that we need to address now. And in the past several days and weeks, there's been a lot of talk about who has more leverage, who's winning, what the political stakes are. You hear a lot of different answers to those questions, depending on who you ask, quite frankly. But I'll tell you one thing. Those are not the questions on the mind of our federal workers. Just this morning, at about 4 o'clock this morning, I had a conversation with several TSA agents in the airport, Yeager Airport, where I fly out of to come to Washington. And what I got in response from them in talking about the situation was a lot of head shaking and a lot of questions. But their questions have to do with how are they going to pay their bills and when is this going to end? And I understand their frustration. I'm frustrated. That's exactly why I've always said that a shutdown is no way to govern. It's not in anyone's best interest. It's a disservice to our federal workers, and it's a show of our inability to do our job in conjunction with those on the other side of the aisle. And it's a signal to the American people that we think this confusing and ineffective way to govern is okay, when it's not. It's not okay. We're here in this body to work together, to get over the rifts that we may have, and to move forward to do the people's work. We got to fix this situation, and we got to fix it now. We have an opportunity today to do that, and I plan to do that by voting for the President's proposed compromise. This proposal does two things that we should all want. It reopens the government, and it helps to secure our southern borders. If we pass this amendment, and I hope that we do, we will bring our furloughed workers back to work, and they will get paid. We will pay the dedicated men and women of our Coast Guard, our federal prison guards, and our TSA and Border Control personnel, and many others, many of whom I've talked with. And we'll take a major step forward in securing our nation. The resources in this bill are necessary, I believe, are necessary, because I believe we do face a crisis on our southern border. Over 153,000 people were apprehended last year in the last 3 months of 2018. And that number does not include the people that were not apprehended at our southern border. The number of illegal boarding crossings was up more than 80% in the last 3 months of 2018 as compared to the last 3 months of 2017. And the composition of those being detained for crossing the border is changing. In 2000, 98% of those detained for illegally crossing the border were Mexican nationals, and most were single adults. They could be repatriated to Mexico very quickly, within hours. But in 2018, more than 56% of individuals detained were from places other than Mexico, a large portion from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And increasingly, individuals are showing up at our borders from all over the world. And 40% were either unaccompanied minors or arrived as part of a family unit. That's way up. That's way up. That means longer detention proceedings that have placed a burden on our immigration court system, and it means an increased need for facilities to safely and responsibly house these people for a longer period of time. I visited the detention centers in Texas. The facts make it very clear, I believe, that there is a crisis, and the amendment that we will vote on today offers a solution. We also know that physical barriers work. In the San Diego, Tucson, El Centro, and El Paso regions, where the construction of physical barriers, where there are constructed physical barriers, the illegal boarding crossings have gone down by more than 90%. I mean, that's undeniable. We right now have 654 miles of physical barrier in place today. I've heard folks say that we don't have any walls or we don't have any barriers. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. If we pass this amendment, we can build another 234 miles in areas like the Rio Grande Valley, where career Border Patrol personnel tell us that it's the most needed. There's been a lot of talk that the professionals should be in charge here in terms of telling us how and what the best methods of protecting our borders are. Well, they are in charge. As subcommittee chair, I've had several meetings with them for them to tell me what their border security plan is, and the CBP has that. This amendment would fund the bulk of the top 10 requests. They have a 33-point plan. This would get us through the top 10. The funding in this bill provides for a border wall system, which is much more than just a physical barrier. It provides lighting, sensors, cameras, and access roads to help our Border Patrol agents gain and maintain operational control of the border. These are the things that the Border Patrols ask for. A wall is not the only solution, but it is a critical part of the solution. The resources included in the amendment for the southern border are important to the security of our nation, and they are especially important to address our drug crisis. Fentanyl seizures by the Border Patrol at the ports of entry are up 122% from last year. Remember, fentanyl is a killer. Over half the deaths by overdose in our state had some bit or some part of fentanyl involved. Methamphetamine, which I hear is on the rise. Methamphetamine seizures from the ports of entry are up 75%. The border wall system will reduce the flow of these illegal drugs between our ports of entry. We do know that much of the heroin, fentanyl, and methamphetamine that is hurting so many Americans cross our border at our ports of entry. So this amendment addresses that issue as well. It provides $805 million for technology, canines, and personnel to stop the flow of illegal drugs into our country. That's what West Virginians are interested in. This drug crisis is really impacting us. This would be an unprecedented investment in these types of detection capabilities, a complete game changer. The amendment would allow us to hire more people, which is another thing the CPB says that they need. 750 new border agents and 375 new custom officers to complement these investments. The combination of technology and personnel, both at our ports of entry and along the border, with the border wall system will enhance our security. It will choke off a major source of the heroin and fentanyl that has devastated my state, and I'm sure the President of the Senate state as well, and across our country. Resources are also included in the amendment to detain those who are apprehended for illegally crossing our border. I support the important work of the men and women of ICE, and I want them to be able to maintain custody of offenders rather than be forced to release those who have entered our country illegally due to a lack of space. In my view, that is not only more secure and more safe for us, it's actually more safe and secure for anybody who's involved in the immigration system. They and many more of the brave men and women of the Department of Homeland Security continue to perform these difficult tasks without getting paid during this shutdown. Chairman Shelby's amendment is not a short-term patch. We're kind of past the time where we need a short-term patch. We need to move forward. It is not a continuing resolution that runs our government on autopilot for a little while and denies the Senate the ability to make smart choices in exercising the power of the purse. Instead, it includes 7 full appropriations bills that received significant bipartisan support in the Appropriations Committee, one of which being my bill at the Subcommittee of Homeland Security that was passed in a bipartisan way. 4 of these bills passed the Senate floor with overwhelming support. And I am very proud that the bill that I put forward in committee, along with some additions, are a part of this package. $11.9 billion is provided for our Coast Guard. This was in my bill, including to begin construction of something I think is critical to our national security, which are polar security cutters. More than $4.8 billion is provided for the TSA to improve this transportation security. $19.8 billion is appropriated for FEMA to make sure that we have the necessary resources to respond to past and future natural disasters. There are important priorities within these bills and from other subcommittees as well. A couple I'd like to highlight: the agriculture title has $550 million for a rural broadband pilot project that I strongly support as part of my Capito Connect plan in the state of West Virginia. The FSGG title has resources for the drug-free communities and high-intensity drug task forces, which are critical to stopping this drug epidemic that I've spoken about. The CJS title has $468 million to combat the opioid epidemic and another $30 million for economic development assistance in coalfield communities. These are just a few examples of what this Shelley Amendment has. The amendment that the Democrat leader has proposed reopens the government through February the 8th. It provides no new resources to address the security and humanitarian crisis on our southern border. Let me repeat that. It provides no new resources to address the security and humanitarian crisis on our southern border. Passing the Schumer plan would put us in the same position on February 8th that exists today. We don't need to pause the shutdown for 15 days and ignore border security. Article 1 of the Constitution gives us, as the Congress, the power of the purse, and we should exercise it by making smart choices based on the situation that is in front of us today. Continuing resolutions only cut and paste the choices that we made last year. We should instead pass the 7 appropriations bills before us that fund the government for the rest of the year in a thoughtful way, a bipartisan way, while also providing necessary resources to protect our nation. President Trump has made a significant concession by asking that we include a provision giving 3 years of certainty to those covered by the DACA executive order, as well as those who have been on temporary protective status. That provision is included in this amendment. This is the type of reasonable compromise that is necessary to pass major legislation during a period of divided government. No one, not the president, not any senator, not any representative, gets everything they want in this bill or any bill, really. And the bill includes items that many of us individually might have left out if we wrote the bill ourselves, but that's the nature of compromise. The 7 appropriations bill that make up the Shelley Amendment are the products of significant bipartisan compromise on behalf of the nation. And I believe we should embrace the spirit of compromise to end this shutdown and secure our border. What can't be compromised is our nation's security. You know, we just celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day last Monday. And as I was reading a lot of his famous quotes, I thought about this one because of the situation that we find ourselves in right now. Quote, "If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. Let's start moving forward together." I hope that all of my colleagues will embrace this sentiment, and I hope that as I vote for the Shelley Amendment, we'll get enough to push it over the Senate floor and over to the House. I yield the floor. Thank you.
There's more from the Senate floor. Today